Robert Mueller's team has accused former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort of witness tampering. The special counsel in the investigation into alleged collusion between President Donald Trump's 2016 campaign team and Russian officials has said in a court filing that Mr. Manafort and an associate repeatedly contacted two witnesses in an effort to sway their testimony. The longtime foreign political agent was under house arrest at the time of the suspected contact, and as a result, Mr. Mueller has asked that federal judge Amy Berman Jackson promptly reconsider Mr. Manafort's release. If she does, he could be sent to jail instead of remaining on home confinement. Judge refuses to dismiss Mueller charges against Paul Manafort. FBI Special Agent Brock Doman, in a declaration filed with Mr. Mueller's motion, said Mr. Manafort had attempted to call, text, and send encrypted messages in February 2018 to two people from the Habsburg Group, a firm he had worked with in the past when promoting the interests of Ukraine in the U.S. Agents have recovered telephone and text records from Mr. Manafort's iCloud account as evidence of his contact with the two individuals, Mr. Doman said. Mr. Trump's former campaign manager was indicted in the alleged Russian collusion case on 30 October 2017 on a number of fraud, money laundering, and failure to register as a foreign agent charges, but has not pleaded guilty, unlike his associate and former campaign deputy Rick Gates. MSNBC's Nicole Wallace stops reading Trump tweets on air. These are bold-faced lies. The witnesses Mr. Mueller has said Mr. Manafort attempted to influence were not named in the court filing. Mr. Trump has repeatedly said there was no collusion between campaign team members and Russian officials, calling the FBI on parallel congressional investigations a witch hunt on numerous occasions. Mr. Manafort is a Republican strategist and former Trump campaign manager. He resigned from that post over questions about his extensive lobbying overseas, including in Ukraine, where he represented pro-Russian interests. Mr. Manafort turned himself in at FBI headquarters to special counsel Robert Mueller's team on October 30, 2017, after he was indicted under seal on charges that include conspiracy against the United States, conspiracy to launder money, unregistered agent of a foreign principal, false and misleading U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act statements, false statements, and 7 counts of failure to file reports of foreign bank and financial accounts. Mr. Gates joined the Trump team in spring 2016, and served as a top aide until he left to work at the Republican National Committee after the departure of former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort. Mr. Gates had previously worked on several presidential campaigns, on international political campaigns in Europe and Africa, and had 15 years of political or financial experience with multinational firms, according to his bio. Mr. Gates was indicted alongside Mr. Manafort by special counsel Robert Mueller's team on charges that include conspiracy against the United States, conspiracy to launder money, unregistered agent of a foreign principal, false and misleading U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act statements, false statements, and 7 counts of failure to file reports of foreign bank and financial accounts. George Papadopoulos was a former foreign policy advisor for the Trump campaign, having joined around March 2016. Mr. Papadopoulos pleaded guilty to federal charges for lying to the FBI as a part of a cooperation agreement with special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Mr. Papadopoulos claimed in an interview with the FBI that he had made contacts with Russian sources before joining the Trump campaign, but he actually began working with them after joining the team. Mr. Papadopoulos allegedly took a meeting with a professor in London who reportedly told him that Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton. The professor also allegedly introduced Mr. Papadopoulos to a Russian who is said to have close ties to officials at the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Papadopoulos also allegedly was in contact with a woman whom he incorrectly described in one email to others in the campaign as the niece to Russian President Vladimir Putin. The president's eldest son met with a Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, on 9 June 2016 at Trump Tower in New York. He said in an initial statement that the meeting was about Russia halting adoptions of its children by U.S. citizens. Then, he said it was regarding the Magnitsky Act, a U.S. law blacklisting Russian human rights abusers. In a final statement, Mr. Trump Jr. released a chain of emails that revealed he took the meeting in hopes of getting information Ms. Veselnitskaya had about Hillary Clinton's alleged financial ties to Russia. He and the president called it standard opposition research in the course of campaigning, and that no information came from the meeting. The meeting was set up by an intermediary, Rob Goldstone. Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort were also at the same meeting. Mr. Kushner is President Donald Trump's son-in-law and a key advisor to the White House. He met with a Russian banker appointed by Russian President Vladimir Putin in December. Mr. Kushner has said he did so in his role as an advisor to Mr. Trump, while the bank says he did so as a private developer. Mr. Kushner has also volunteered to testify in the Senate about his role helping to arrange meetings between Trump advisors and Russian ambassador to the U.S. Sergei Kislyak. Former tabloid journalist and now music publicist Rob Goldstone is a contact of the Trump family through the previously Trump-owned 2013 Miss Universe pageant, which took place in Moscow. In June 2016, he wrote to Donald Trump Jr. offering a meeting with a Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, who had information about Hillary Clinton. Mr. Goldstone was the intermediary for Russian pop star Emin Agalarov and his father, real estate magnate Aras, who played a role in putting on the 2013 pageant. In an email chain released by Mr. Trump Jr., Mr. Goldstone seemed to indicate Russian government's support of Donald Trump's campaign. Aras Agalarov R. is a wealthy Moscow-based real estate magnate and son Emin L. is a pop star. Both played a role in putting on the previously Trump-owned 2013 Miss Universe pageant in Moscow. They allegedly had information about Hillary Clinton and offered that information to the Trump campaign through a lawyer with whom they had worked with, Natalia Veselnitskaya, and music publicist Rob Goldstone. Natalia Veselnitskaya is a Russian lawyer with ties to the Kremlin. She has worked on real estate issues and reportedly counted the FSB as a client in the past. She has ties to a Trump family connection, real estate magnate Aras Agalarov, who had helped set up the Trump-owned 2013 Miss Universe pageant, which took place in Moscow. Ms. Veselnitskaya met with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort in Trump Tower on the 9th of June 2016 but denies the allegation that she went there promising information on Hillary Clinton's alleged financial ties to Russia. She contends that the meeting was about the U.S. adoptions of Russian children being stopped by Moscow as a reaction to the Magnitsky Act, a U.S. law blacklisting Russian human rights abusers. Mr. Flynn was named as Trump's national security advisor but was forced to resign from his post for inappropriate communication with Russian ambassador to the U.S. Sergei Kislyak. He had misrepresented a conversation he had with Mr. Kislyak to Vice President Mike Pence, telling him wrongly that he had not discussed sanctions with the Russian. Mr. Kislyak, the former longtime Russian ambassador to the U.S., is at the center of the web said to connect President Donald Trump's campaign with Russia. Mr. Stone is a former Trump advisor who worked on the political campaigns of Richard Nixon, George H.W. Bush, and Ronald Reagan. Mr. Stone claimed repeatedly in the final months of the campaign that he had back-channel communications with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange and that he knew the group was going to dump damaging documents to the campaign of Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton, which did happen. Mr. Stone also had contacts with the hacker Gucci 2.0 on Twitter, who claimed to have hacked the DNC and is linked to Russian intelligence services. The U.S. Attorney General was forced to recuse himself from the Trump-Russia investigation after it was learned that he had lied about meeting with Russian ambassador to the U.S. Sergei Kislyak. Mr. Page is a former advisor to the Trump campaign and has a background working as an investment banker at Merrill Lynch. Mr. Page met with Russian ambassador to the U.S. Sergei Kislyak during the 2016 Republican National Convention in Cleveland. Mr. Page had invested in oil companies connected to Russia and had admitted that U.S.-Russia sanctions had hurt his bottom line. Mr. Gordon met with Russian ambassador to the U.S. Sergei Kislyak during the 2016 Republican National Convention to discuss how the U.S. and Russia could work together to combat Islamist extremism should then Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump win the election. The meeting came days before a massive leak of DNC emails that has been connected to Russia. Mr. Comey was fired from his post as head of the FBI by President Donald Trump. The timing of Mr. Comey's firing raised questions around whether or not the FBI's investigation into the Trump campaign may have played a role in the decision. Mr. Bahara refused, alongside 46 other U.S. district attorneys across the country, to resign once President Donald Trump took office, after previous assurances from Mr. Trump that he would keep his job. Mr. Bahara had been heading up several investigations, including one into one of President Donald Trump's favorite cable television channels, Fox News. Several investigations would lead back to that district too, including those into Mr. Trump's campaign ties to Russia, and Mr. Trump's assertion that Trump Tower was wiretapped on orders from his predecessor. Ms. Yates, a former Deputy Attorney General, was running the Justice Department while President Donald Trump's pick for Attorney General awaited confirmation. Ms. Yates was later fired by Mr. Trump from her temporary post over her refusal to implement Mr. Trump's first travel ban. She had also warned the White House about potential ties former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn to Russia after discovering those ties during the FBI's investigation into the Trump campaign's connections to Russia. Recently, Mr. Trump said he has the absolute right to pardon himself if needed. The president can issue pardons for federal crimes, but not state or local convictions. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said in response to repeated questioning about the president's comments that thankfully the president hasn't done anything wrong and wouldn't need a pardon. Mr. Manafort's trial in the Washington, D.C. federal court, one of two cases he has been indicted in, is set to begin the 17th of September.